The bathroom air hung heavy, a gray, suffocating curtain of steam that clung to the tiles and blurred the edges of the room. Sarah stepped out of the shower, the heat radiating off her skin, and felt a sudden, sharp drop in temperature as she moved toward the center of the floor. Water dripped from her hair, hitting the cold porcelain with the rhythmic, hollow sound that echoed against the silence of the apartment. She was entirely alone. The deadbolt on the front door had been locked since 6, and the windows remained sealed against the evening chill. She stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the building, but heard nothing beyond the faint, distant rattle of pipes in the wall. The steam was thick, coating the surfaces in a slick, damp layer that made the room feel smaller, tighter, and entirely cut off from the rest of the world. She reached out, her hand moving through the humid haze toward the vanity. Her fingertips brushed the cool, smooth surface of the mirror, leaving a clear trail through the condensation. She paused, her breath hitching as she prepared to wipe away the fog to see her own face, unaware that the reflection waiting for her was already shifting in the dark. She dragged her fingers across the glass, a slow, deliberate arc that cut through the gray condensation. The circle cleared, revealing the surface beneath. Her eyes locked onto the glass, and her pulse skipped a beat. Scrawled in bold, thick red lipstick were the words, "I'm behind you." Sarah froze. She stared at the letters, the red pigment stark against the reflection of the dark room behind her. Her breath hitched. She did not turn around. She could not. The logic of her locked apartment fought against the visual evidence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, rhythmic thudding. She tried to inhale, but the air felt thin. She was trapped in the silence, her own reflection staring back with terrified eyes, waiting for the inevitable. The silence shattered as Sarah spun around, her heels clicking sharply against the slick floor. She braced for a collision, her arms instinctively shielding her chest, but she hit nothing but damp air. The bathroom was empty. The shower curtain hung perfectly still, a heavy, plastic barrier that hid nothing. She scanned the corners, her eyes darting from the toilet to the sink, searching for any shadow that didn't belong. There was no one. The door remained firmly shut, the brass handle unmoving. A sharp, brittle laugh escaped her lips, a sound that felt jagged and foreign. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of her heart. It was a trick of the light, she told herself. She turned back toward the mirror, her movements jerky and stiff. She reached out to touch the door handle, gripping the cold metal. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes fixed on the mirror, waiting for the reflection to confirm that she was truly, safely alone. Sarah leaned toward the mirror, her breath fogging the glass once more. She squinted, expecting to see the red lipstick smear, but the surface was clean. The words had vanished. She blinked, her brow furrowing, as she reached out to wipe away the remaining condensation with her palm. The glass was smooth, cold, and entirely blank. A flicker of relief washed over her, but it died the moment her hand pulled away. Beneath the surface of the glass, the red pigment began to bleed back into existence. It did not smear or drip. It formed with deliberate, jagged precision. The letters crawled across the mirror, shifting and reshaping themselves until they settled into a new, chilling command. "Now, I'm in front." Sarah recoiled, her back hitting the tiled wall with a dull thud. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm. She stared at the words, her eyes wide and unblinking. The lipstick was vivid, glowing with a synthetic, unnatural intensity. Every muscle in her body went rigid, held in place by the terrifying realization that the threat was no longer behind her, but standing right where she was looking. The command on the glass burned into her vision. Sarah didn't think, she moved. She lunged toward the bathroom door, her fingers clawing at the brass handle. It was ice cold, biting into her skin, but it refused to turn. She twisted it with both hands, her knuckles turning white, but the mechanism was seized solid. Panic surged, hot and blinding. She slammed her shoulder against the wood, the impact jarring her entire frame. But the door didn't even shudder. She pulled back and hammered her fists against the panel, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small, tiled room. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking, desperate for any sign of life from the hallway. She waited, her ear pressed to the wood, expecting the sound of a neighbor, a footstep, or even a muffled voice. There was nothing. The silence from the outside was absolute. She pounded again, harder this time, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The hallway was empty. The world beyond this door had ceased to exist. Sarah spun around, her heels skidding on the damp tiles as she retreated from the locked door. She had no choice but to face the mirror again. Her breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound that died in the air. She looked for her own reflection, expecting to see her pale face and wide, terrified eyes. Instead, there was only a void. The glass surface remained, but the person who should have been staring back was gone. In her place, a tall, distorted shape began to solidify. It did not move like a human. It shifted with a liquid, unnatural grace, its limbs elongated and blurred at the edges. Sarah pressed her palms against the mirror, her fingers trembling. As the figure reached out, it placed a hand against the glass from the other side. The surface didn't ripple, but the figure's palm flattened against the pane, leaving a smear of cold condensation. It tilted its head, a slow, rhythmic motion. The silence in the bathroom deepened, heavy and absolute, as the figure watched her through the glass, waiting for the next move. Sarah retreated until her back hit the cold, tiled corner, her hands gripping a towel so hard her knuckles turned gray. She watched the mirror, her eyes locked on the spot where the figure's hand pressed against the glass. A faint, high-pitched sound began to vibrate through the room, the sound of tempered glass under unbearable stress. The surface was no longer a reflection. It was a cage under assault. Sarah held her breath, watching the cracks deepen. Then, the impossible happened. A single, pale finger pushed through the center of the glass, the edges splintering around it like ice. It was followed by a second, then a third. The movement fluid and relentless. The glass groaned, a low, grinding noise. The lipstick message began to rewrite itself. The red letters bled and stretched, forming the demand. "Let me out." Sarah did not move. She could not. Her gaze remained fixed on the pale fingers that had breached the barrier, their tips hooked firmly over the jagged, broken edge of the glass. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a static pressure that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered. They buzzed with a harsh, electrical protest, casting erratic shadows that danced across the tiles. Then, with a final, sharp pop, the filament gave out. The room plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. In the sudden void, the sound of the mirror was deafening. It began with a single, sharp crack, followed instantly by a violent, cascading crash as the entire pane gave way. Shards of glass rained down onto the tiled floor, skittering and clinking in the dark like falling teeth. The sound echoed off the walls, filling the small space with the sharp, metallic tang of broken glass. Sarah pressed her palms against the wall behind her, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Sarah remained pinned against the tiles, her muscles locked in a rigid, involuntary tension. She did not scream. The sound of her own heart hammering against her ribs felt like a drum in the small, enclosed space, a frantic rhythm that seemed to mock the stillness of the room. She forced herself to listen, peeling back the layers of her own panic to focus on the air around her. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle displacement of air that signaled movement. Then, it came. A soft, rhythmic sound of breathing. It was not her own. The intake of air was slow, wet, and labored, vibrating with a hollow, unnatural quality. It was right beside her ear. The heat of that breath brushed against her skin, a cold, stagnant draft that carried the scent of damp earth and metallic rot. She felt the slight pressure of a presence leaning in, a weight that did not displace the air but seemed to consume it. She did not turn her head. She did not reach out. She simply stared into the void, her eyes wide and unblinking, waiting for the inevitable. The breathing hitched, then steadied, lingering in the space between them. The nightmare had crossed the threshold. The hand she had feared was no longer behind her. It had finally arrived, and the silence that followed was absolute.